That is an odd feeling to turn around and have a machine gun pointed at you. I've done some sketchy things, and this even made me go like, whew, man, ugh, like, ooh. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ryan the Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you? I am Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Listen, on today's video, I wanted to go over a question I got from somebody, and they said, hey, at what point in time do you, maintenance, the park in general, at what point in time do you know when to evacuate a ride? So, I wanted to talk about it in today's video, so let's get into it.
Now get ready, here we go.
So, first of all, thank you for coming back and watching another video. I do appreciate it. I hope you're having a good day. I hope everything is going well for you. On today's video, I wanted to talk about that time rides break down. We all get stuck on them if you ride enough amusement rides. And you're sitting there and you're waiting and you're waiting, and it seems like forever passes by. And then eventually someone comes along and says, well, you need to get off and you need to exit. So that's an evacuation, standard operating procedure. So I want to talk a bit about that whole process and some of the decisions that lead up to it. So basically, when a ride breaks down, we go out there as a maintenance department, we go out and assess what the problem is and how to repair it. Sometimes the ride breaks down in a very easy fashion and it's simply just, okay, we put our keys in, switched it into the right modes, we got the rides reset, and you're back up and running. Sometimes that involves some extra cycling and testing, but for the most part we can move the trains around either manually or under some special functions and get everybody off. But then sometimes we can't, and that's where an evacuation comes into play. So what happens there is that we go up to a ride, and we'll just say we go out there and we have two trains stopped. One's in the station, common places, one's on the lift hill up at Lift Park, which is about 3/4 of the way up the lift hill. And we get out there and we say, what's the problem? And it says, well, there's a proximity sensor fault in the block brakes ahead of it. Okay, so we switched right over to manual mode, clear, the air clears. We're like, all right. We switch back to automatic mode, the air pops right back up again. It's like, uh-oh, we have a problem now. So we switch back to manual, try to clear it again, switch back to automatic, it pops back up again. So then we start getting antsy. It's like, okay, we need to try something different. So we will go maybe power the ride down and then power it back up again. And then we'll go through all the reset and startup procedures. And then we go to turn the ride back to automatic and that air pops right back up again. So now we have a problem. So at this point, we might have spare proximity sensors, but to take the logic system down and remove a proximity sensor and put something back in, we would have to reset the block in order to do that. And one of the things that's a big no-no is resetting blocks with people on the ride, because you run into some very dangerous situations, i.e. Smiler. When the Smiler happened, that was one of those things that they went out and reset the block. And there was another train that was in that block and it allowed it to clear. Older rides especially are not that smart and they don't know. If you simply press reset with the block occupied, it will wipe out that train and then you could cause an accident. So typically when it comes down to like, well, we have to do a block reset with people on the ride, most of the time, most parks don't allow that these days. It's like, nope, you're going to have to do an evacuation. So it's like, okay, at that point, we evacuate. That's a pretty clear-cut scenario. Let's go over something else. Let's say we're out there and here's a good one. There's a train stopped because the brakes ahead of it say that there is a pressure switch low. So each brake should have 90 psi of pressure in there, and one brake says that it does not have that pressure in there. So it's throwing an error. You can't start the ride up, you can't let it go because it just won't let you. The computer says no. So you walk out to that area and look at the brakes, and all the brakes have 150 psi running to them. They're all perfectly fine. You might test cycle the brake, and they say, let's go through, and which brake does it say? You say, hey, what brake does it say it is? That's number 4. It's like, okay, so you go test 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. 4 test just fine, 5 and 6. It's like, they all test fine. It's like, okay, so let's start the ride back up. Start the ride up, the train moves a little bit and then stops. It's like, what problem? What's a problem? And they come back and they say, it's air pressure fault, brake 4 again. It's like, dang it. Okay, so you go over and you exercise brake 4 some more. Does it clear? Yep, it cleared. It's like, okay, switch back, start it. As soon as the ride starts up, shuts back down again. Brake 4 fault. So you go over there and you're trying stuff. You're tapping it with a wrench on the side. You're exercising it really hard. You're trying to do everything you can to just massage that brake just to get the people off the ride. Because believe me, we don't want to take the people off the ride midway either. That's not fun for us. It's not fun for the people. It's a long process. We don't want to do it. Most people don't want to go through it. So we're trying everything we can just to massage that air and make the ride happy just for one more cycle in order to get the people off. So we're doing everything we can trying to do it. And at this point, this is where the waiting game starts, because we will sit there and go like, okay, maybe if I just can do this, if I can do that, if I can, maybe I'll take the pressure up to the station and bring it back down a couple times. Maybe that will make that sensor happy and it will let the train go. And then operations, typically the supervisor comes out and they're like, hey, what's going on? It's like, oh, we got a brake pressure fault in number 4. Are you guys going to be able to fix it? It's like, fix it, we're trying. But right now we're just trying to make it happy to unload the ride. I go, okay, what do you think your chances are of success? It's like, honestly, I don't know. I just need a couple more minutes. Okay, you guys can have a couple more minutes. Does that sound weird to anybody that it's like, oh, you can have a couple more minutes? It's like, why is operations telling maintenance that they can have a couple more minutes? Well, there's a weird thing about that. It's weird for a lot of people to understand anyway. Operations has control of the ride. And for that reason, it's like we typically, a lot of parks are this way, maintenance is not qualified, certified, trained to operate a ride with people on it. Like, I was certified in every ride in the park. I can do everything to any sort of ride whatsoever. As soon as people get on that ride, I can't touch it. Because I was never certified on any ride in my entire park to operate it with people on there. So it's one of those weird things. It's like, okay, so for our particular park, when we showed up and we had to switch a ride into manual mode and move the trains around manually with people on it, it required an operational supervisor to give us permission and to stand there and watch us and make sure we were doing everything okay, because we weren't used to running in those scenarios. And you're saying, well, what's the real harm? It's the people are locked onto the train. They're not going anywhere. What's the big deal? It's actually not the people on the train. It's the people in the station. By the way, stay off the air gates. Why do I have to keep saying this? Anyways, the people in the station are the ones. That's where the real hazards of operating the ride come in. Is all the people standing waiting to get on the ride, all the people that have piled up in the exit now waiting for their friends or family to get off of the ride. If those people come in and compromise the load platform, it's a very unsafe condition to operate a ride in. So when I show up and operate a ride in the morning time or at nighttime, nobody's there. I have complete access to everything. I'm not worried about somebody coming in and getting in the way of me dispatching a train. It's not a thing. But operations is worried about it, but I'm not. So there's a different set of hazards to look out for. So it's very important to understand that operations has control of that ride until they don't. So it's up to operations, typically, to say, yeah, you have more time. go ahead, take a couple more minutes and see if you can figure it out. And sometimes we'll take that couple more minutes and we'll still be out there playing with that brake. That stupid air won't clear. And then after a couple minutes, I say, hey, how's it going? Progress report, nothing new. We're still trying to futz with the thing. It's still not working. Well, do you think you can get the ride cleared? I'm not sure. Just give me a couple more minutes. At that point, it's operations call again. It's like, well, okay. Couple more minutes. And now, in the background, there's a clock that's running. So where I worked, we were pretty good about it, and they said, you know, once a ride stops and people are stuck on the ride, once that ride happens and the operations calls it in, we started a timer, and it was typically 15 minutes. If we could not get a ride not running, if we could not get a ride unloaded in about 15 minutes, the decision was typically made to evacuate the ride. Now, this gray area that I'm talking about right now, where I'm like, give me a couple more minutes, this is typically what happens when you're at the 15-minute window. It's been 15 minutes. It's like, okay, you can have a couple more minutes. And then maybe they get a couple more and some extra, and they come back at 20 minutes. And they're like, hey, how's it going? And it's like, I'm still trying, and they come back at 25 minutes. How's it going? I'm not having any luck. Okay, let's evacuate it. Why? Why did we evacuate the ride? Because we were past our time window that we said we were going to be in. So we said 15 minutes, and then we were going to get people off the rides, and now those people have been sitting in that train for 25 minutes. Because I was the one saying, I think I can get this, Now you're saying, why wouldn't you just do this earlier? Most rides, like at a handful of parks, they have these rides that are really easy to evacuate. They just go up and they go, oh yeah, you come off and just walk out this way and you're fine. But a lot of major roller coasters are not that way. There's a lot of stuff you have to do to get people off. And I'll go into that in a little bit. So it's typically, from the time you call an evacuation, say, yep, we're going to need to take everybody off, most of the time it's about 30 to 45 minutes before everybody is finally off, like actually out and what we call cleared the ride. Everyone's cleared the ride. Okay, about 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, somewhere there. Some rides are much faster, some rides are slower. So all these factors, these times is going through everybody's head. The bottom line is we don't want people stuck on rides for hours. We don't want them stuck on there for an hour. We don't want them stuck on there for 45 minutes. So we really, really try to get people off as quick as we can. There are some areas where that mentality is accelerated quickly. So, for instance, people sitting in a brake run, well, we could play with the ride for quite some time because it's typically towards the end of the ride and they're sitting in a somewhat flat level spot. It's not a big deal. The conditions are comfortable. It's like, okay, you have some little bit more leeway time than other places. The one place that was always never good to get people stuck on is the lift hill, and that's typically the number one place where the train stops. It goes up to its top of the lift hill, which is the last spot of the block on the lift, and then it says, hey, is the track in front of me clear? And the ride says, nope, there's a problem ahead of you, so it stops the train up there at the very top because it didn't want it advancing. So those were always the ones that's like, oh crap, we got to get those people down off of there quick. Now, why? What's the problem with being stuck on a lift hill? Actually, there is no problem. It's perfectly fine. It's a safe place to be, safe as the rest of the ride. People's mentality, it's the highest spot on the ride, and people that were already afraid of heights that are on the ride now, well, they're starting to freak out pretty good. But actually, that's not it either. Most of the time when the ride stops, right, we start our, okay, we got 15 minutes to get the ride back up and running. Let's go find out what it is. Let's get that fault cleared out. But what else happens when the ride stops? Well, me being a concerned parent sitting there, well, my son wanted to go on that ride, but I didn't want to go on the ride, or I couldn't go on the ride maybe. And so I've been waiting here, I've been waiting, and I've been sitting out there staring at that station, and I finally see him get on the train. And I'm out there with my camera now because I'm like, all right, he's going to ride this ride and it's going to be awesome. And I start recording and he starts going up that lift hill, and then at the top, it stops. Why? What happened? Right? Then all this, everything starts flowing through your head. What's going on? Is my kid in danger? What's happening? I don't know what's happening. People outside of the ride now start to panic. And then, you know, it happened a lot. This happened a lot. So people in the queue line, either waiting for the ride or waiting for their family to get off the ride, people in the queue line would call 911. And then, with exaggeration, just a grain of salt, right? They would call up and they would say, oh, my kid's on this ride, it stopped, it's been stuck for hours, and they can't get him off. That's the way it actually comes across to the 911 operators. People have been stuck on this ride for hours, and they can't get off. So, actually, this is fairly common with amusement parks because people tend to overreact. So, at this point in time, our park in particular, 911, fire, rescue, that sort of thing, had straight through numbers to call the park. So people would say, this ride stopped, they've been stuck on there for hours, people can't get off, you need to send fire and rescue out here because these people can't get off this ride. Oh my gosh. And fire and rescue would call the park up. Hey, we got a call to come out to this ride, what's going on? And then people would, it would typically go through security. Security would patch it through to operations, and they would say, what's going on out there? And operations would simply just give them the call and say, here it is. These people went on here, the ride dispatched. At this time, we'll use military time, right? At 15:45, the ride was called down, that it was loaded with people on it. And then the fire department, rescue on the other side looks at their watch and go, it's 15:48. And we would go, yeah, that ride literally just went down 3 minutes ago. Maintenance is still on their way out there. They haven't even had a chance to make it to the ride yet. But we'll let you know if there's a problem. And you go, oh, okay, that's fine. Because as much as people can call them, we can call them back too. And if there was some weird thing going on, we could call fire and rescue out ourselves. Now, we would definitely know when to call fire and rescue to come out for a ride. Like that is definitely something we would know. If for some reason you had a train stop middle of the track somewhere, people were up 60 feet in the air or something like that, then that's time. It's like, yep, call fire and rescue out. It's not that we can't get the people out, it's just that we are going to need assistance, specialized assistance. So we are going to call fire and rescue out. Interestingly enough, the park I worked at, fire and rescue actually came out and trained at the park. They did it all the time. In fact, they loved coming out to the park and doing it. It was fun for them. So they got to come out and they got to theorize. They say, well, what happens if something stopped here? And what happens if we had to get up there? And then their remote access teams and stuff would come out. And typically it was always while the park was closed, but they would string cables up on top of stuff and get up there. One of the weirdest things I've ever seen was, not weirdest I should say, but it was so weird for me to see, which was fire and rescue was out there and they were simulating someone injured at the very top of our highest ride. And so they went up there and it was a firefighter who was simulating the injured person, because they weren't going to use a dummy or a theoretical. They're using actual people. So he was up there simulating being injured. So then other firefighters went up there with the stretcher board thing, and then they put him on there and they banded him down. And then at that point in time, I've done some sketchy things, and this even made me go like, whew, man, ugh, like, ooh. Well, if you like this video and you want to hear more like it, go ahead and press the like button down there, give it a thumbs up, subscribe. Let me know what you thought about the video, future ideas you want to see. I'm always open for making new stuff, new content. And I got lots of other content if you want to see that as well. I try to upload once a week on Fridays, so that's something to look forward to. Hopefully I can always keep up that pace. And then if you want to ask me questions, go ahead and post them in the comments down there. I typically try to respond with best I can questions down there. If you have something that's too sensitive for comments, which there's plenty of people that have sensitive questions that they don't want to ask publicly, which is perfectly fine. I have an email address, it's RyanTheRideMechanic@yahoo.com. You can always email me the questions as well too. And I've just recently started up an Instagram account too, Ryan the Ride Mechanic on Instagram. So you got ways to find me, although I don't know what I'm going to do with Instagram. Kind of curious on that one. I'm still trying to, I've had it for a couple weeks now, and I'm still trying to figure out what to do with it. Trying to find my sweet spot there. I don't know yet. Anyways, like and subscribe. Let me know what you think. And then we'll see what happens from there. So they put the firefighter on the stretcher board, and then they sent him over the platform, right? Our ride wasn't extremely tall, right? Our park had a height limit. So 150 feet is where we were. But still, imagine you're banded down to a stretcher board and you're being put over the edge with your buddies that have ropes tied to everything, letting you down. Now, that is sketchy for me, but I don't know how to do all that stuff, right? Those guys, they're trained in that. That was a special team trained in that sort of thing. So that was normal for them, but it's still just like, oh my gosh, couldn't you guys use a dummy or something? You have to use an actual person. But yep, they used actual people. We had SWAT come in and train. We had the local Army, Air Force people come in and train, because these were big objects with high vantage points. It was an absolute playground for those guys. They loved to come in and do that. It was so much fun. One time we had SWAT in the park. Again, while we're closed, we had SWAT in the park, and they're doing an active shooter situation. This is where they play out this scenario that someone has opened fire, and now the SWAT comes in and basically has to clear the park while looking for this active shooter. So unbeknownst to me, I knew what was going on. I knew the simulation was happening. But what had happened was we're not part of that. Okay, they're not going to bother you if you're not part of it. It's like, that's fine. But we didn't know that for people participating in the active shooter situation, we're wearing orange vests. That was the way they knew. They were wearing orange vests, like reflective safety vests. So here I am. I'm working on a water ride. The water ride's drained, it's closed down, but we're working rehab on it. In comes the water ride in from this outside. I get down on the ground, get down on the ground, go, get down on the ground right now, get down. What's going on? I turn around. There's a SWAT guy with a machine gun pointed at me. I am like, okay. By the way, they weren't allowed to use dummy bullets or even ammunition. Nothing was in the guns. They had special clips loaded into them that were blocked out so nothing could actually be in there. But and those things we went over at the beginning to make sure that the park knew that they were being safe and they weren't going to do anything crazy. But that is an odd feeling to turn around and have a machine gun pointed at you. I was just like, what? What? I don't have my hands up or anything because I'm at work. Like, sorry, I'm at work. Like, what are you doing? But they're like, they were trying to tell me, get down on the ground, get down. And I'm like, whoa, I'm not part of this. And, oh, they're like, oh, you're not part of the simulation? I'm like, no, I'm just working. And they're like, oh, okay, sorry. They had to turn around and walk out. Oh, that was so interesting. Fire and rescue and SWAT and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, we know when to call them when something is out of our control. We don't need people in the queue line calling them for us. So parks are typically work hand in hand with all those emergency services to make sure that when something happens, they have a good response and a good plan, backup plan in place in case something like that goes down. So when we make the decision to call the SCP or evacuation, whatever the park has dubbed this process, the first thing we have to do is, well, kill the energy to the ride, right? We don't need anything moving. We can't have anything moving. So we go out there, and the first thing we do is kill the main disconnect coming in the ride. Some rides have alternative problems when you kill the power that you have to watch out for. Blocked and stored energy, things like that. Vekoma rides, they use brakes that fail open. So if you lose the pressure in the brakes out there, the brake just opens up and the train can roll out of it. That process takes a long time to do. Let's see, it was weekly. We simulated a catastrophic airline failure, and the brakes had to hold the train, stay closed basically, for 20 minutes. So that was another timer that was running. Click, 20 minutes. So if we got a call for one of those rides and it said completely blew the air tank apart, it's in pieces, we got 20 minutes to go out there and chain the trains off before they start to roll forward, theoretically. So we would go out and do stuff like block stuff, chain things off. Any train you go to, doesn't matter which one it was, what type of device was holding it, whenever we started to evacuate a train, we would go up and chain it off. And that process is exactly like it sounds. You take a very thick, big, heavy chain with hooks on it, and you wrap it around the wheel carrier to the track support ribs in the direction. If the train slanted that way, you wrap it from the backside forward. So if all those devices suddenly let go of the train couldn't roll forward. And the same thing if it's on a lift hill. You went from the front of that up higher to where if some devices on the lift hill failed, it couldn't roll backwards. And we'd chain those off, and we get that. The rides that would fail, that if the brakes open, they would, when we killed the power to the air compressor, we started losing air pressure, and the brakes would open and the train could roll forward. If we had a train in that scenario, we would not only throw our chain around the back just to make sure that the train couldn't get out of our control, we would also use a come-along, which is or a chain pull, chain fall, whatever you want to call it. We would use a come-along and hook it onto the opposite side and ratchet it until it was under tension. Because at that point in time, we knew the brakes were going to release, we just didn't know when they were going to release. So the chain was enough to hold it by itself, but we didn't want this unexpected movement. So we put something under tension in there to hold it, to make sure it really didn't go anywhere. All the times I've done this, I've only ever had a train move on me once, and it was very minimal. It was just a little like a nudge forward. But it was that scenario when it lost air pressure completely, and then it started to try to roll. but we had it blocked off. And even that one, we also had track stops we could throw up there, which is just a, it looks like a circle. It's like a clamshell piece like that with a vertical peg on it. So you put that on, put it right in front of one of the road wheels, and the nuts on both sides that would clamp the piece together like that, they just go on finger tight, and just the tension pushing it that way it's not going anywhere. So we would lock the ride out, and then go out to wherever it is, typically open up the infield fences, and then chain the train off. And then we would do whatever we had to do from there. So it depends on the ride. Let's see. We had a boomerang. If you evacuate that thing from the ready brakes between the loop and the lift 2, it was really simple. Chained it off. You just go up there, step on the pedal, tell the people to get out. Easy. If it was on lift 2, we had a special recovery process that you had to do because you had to kill the hydraulic system. So you had to go up there with this hydraulic hand pump and hook it into the hydraulic brake. Open up the valves to the motor to basically let the fluid bypass in the hydraulic pump. And then you would take that manual pump and start pumping up the hydraulic brake until the hydraulic brake opened, and then the motor was allowed to turn backwards at that point, and the train would slowly start coming backwards down the lift hill. It was a very slow process, but it would start coming backwards down the lift hill, and then at the very end we would let people know it's going to come off the chain, which means it's going to accelerate backwards, but only for a brief period of time, because as soon as it starts accelerating, it's going to hit the brakes down at the bottom and stop again. So actually you're going to get this wee ugh feeling. And so we get people ready for that. And then when it did, it was very minor. And then you go down and you have to release the brakes one by one and slowly let the train come back down further and further until eventually you opened one of the brakes and the train didn't go anywhere. And then you would go back and close all the brakes back, put your chain on it, again, let people off. Easy. Lift 1 had a very similar scenario where you put that exact same brake release pump onto lift 1. Open it up and just let the cable down. It was because that was a cable spooled up on lift 1. So that one was slightly different because lift 1 had what was a special device on it that Vekoma put on there. It was called a brake rupture valve. And that was in case the thing broke apart mid-cycle. It wouldn't allow the drum just to go run away. The valving itself behind the motor would govern the speed of that. So it was kind of rough when you did that one because you would open that brake up and that train would just take the long time to come back down. I mean, sometimes it would take another 15 minutes just to get it down off of lift 1 because it would go so slow. But that one has no way to release the catch wagon to bring it back down because catch wagon's under tension. Had an SLC. The SLC was fairly easy because the brakes were pneumatically released. You could pretty much get the train back from almost anywhere. Let's see, get it back from trim 1 and trim 2. Simply just open the brakes and let it roll forward. The lift hill had an emergency generator where you could start the engine up and it would run a small motor at the top and very slowly crawl the train up the lift hill. You weren't supposed to use that to send a train over the lift hill because that's completely overriding 100% of all the safety on the ride. But what actually that was meant for was for a train either at the bottom as it's coming up into the lift hill, or if you had to push one like we've done before, push one from the station onto the lift in order to get the one out of the transfer track trim area over there. You would start that up and you would start that chain moving to slowly bring that one in the station up into the lift. And then once that was a safe distance up, you would manually release the brakes from like trim 2 sitting out there and let the train gently roll into the station, in which case guys would have to go out, manually open the brakes up, and drag the train in by hand. Again, you would think roller coasters would want to roll more, but they don't. Floorless coaster, those are kind of a pain because B&M has these floors strapped to the evacuation areas, and they look kind of funky. If you ever see these things, and as you go along, it's like this big rectangular patch, and there's 4 of them in the area. Those are the temporary evacuation platforms. You basically put it down between the track and the train to make the floor, and then there's some stand-up rails that go on the front row for those, and you let people off 1 row at a time. You typically need to open restraints up. You just need a crescent wrench, turn it about 30 degrees, and all the restraints in 1 row pop open. The boomerang, you push down the pedal. The SLC requires a battery pack you plug into each row, and then when you plug that row in, you push a button underneath there, and the restraints, because they're electric driven, those restraints will slowly unlock and then open. And then if that one's on the lift hill, that's kind of a pain too, because you have to like get this platform up underneath them, again ran by the emergency winch and generator, and then let people off 1 at a time. Each time that platform stops, you have to chain the platform off as well. Mess. Wooden roller coasters are really easy to SCP because they're pretty much got walkway all around everywhere. So you pretty much just go up, throw a chain around it real quick, and then whatever the thing needs to unlock, most of the time it's just lifting up on a wheel or a lever or something, clunk, unlock, and get out. Launch rides, depending on where they stop, can be difficult. We had a suspended impulse coaster that would stop out on the brakes, and when the ride would get into a hardcore fault and shut down, and you couldn't override the brakes because they were really high off the ground. So you needed a whole bunch of people, and what we did is we wrapped a steel cable around the back of the train, and it took 10 people playing tug of war with that train to very painfully, slowly inch it back into the station. An absolute mess for that one. And then once it was back in the station, like the SLC, it also needed a battery pack to open the restraints to get people off. Any rides that use gas cylinders these days, which is a lot of them, any rides that use hydraulics, gas cylinders, they need a battery pack to open them up because there's typically not a manual release. The cylinders from, can't remember the name, it's like Hockenbeck, I think it was. Those cylinders have a manual release on them, but they're one of those things that's kind of like a sealing screw at the same time. They're like, oh yeah, you could open this screw up manually and it will let the fluid bypass on the inside. But it's not like a valve. It's like once you do that, you need to recheck the charge on the accumulator. You need to check the level of the fluid on the inside. So that manual bypass was kind of like a last thing. It's like, don't use that. Pretty much go in if you can and use the battery pack to let people off all the time. But those are some basic scenarios of how to get people off rides. Again, they're so scenario driven, and what's happening and when and where. And oh yeah, aside from the lift, being a difficult spot to get people off of just because of the height, at our place we also had that'd be aside for people calling emergency services as well. It seems to be someone always got a hold of the news every time that happened. And I was always in a rush to get people off the lift because I'm like, oh man, we can't go much further past 15 or 20 minutes before we can get people off the lift hill. So I would work real hard to get the ride going again, like 15-minute mark, start the ride up, and the train went over the lift hill. It's like, woo, because at the 20-minute mark, you can hear a helicopter starting to circle. And you look around, and it's like, yep, there's a news helicopter. And they circle around the ride for a little bit. And you could tell they're like, I thought people were stuck on this ride. Yeah, they said people were stuck on this ride. And they're circling going, well, I don't see anybody stuck on the ride. And they kind of fly around some other rides. They're like, is there anything around there? No, nope, okay, all right. And then they fly the helicopter back off. It's like, man, 15 minutes and I got a news helicopter overhead. Because if they get footage of that, even if you get people off at 20 minutes, that's not what the news gets. The news gets, oh, the riders were stuck on the ride for all day and they went off and, oh my gosh, no one was given Dippin' Dots afterwards. Don't give Dippin' Dots during SAPs or evacuations. Just don't do it. Do funnel cakes, that's fine. Popcorn, soda, whatever you want to, but you can't give away Dippin' Dots. I don't know how many times I have to tell people that. That is not a thing you do. So let's talk about some other types of evacuations. Water rides. Do water rides get evacuated? Yes, they do. Shoot to Chutes ride, we had one of those. Take people off of the lift hill. It's mainly that's where you're SEPing from. I say SEP because that was the term we had given it, but if I say that, if you hear me say that, I mean evacuation. So we have to evacuate people off the lift hill. Much hairier than you think it is, because the ride's not that high off the ground. It's not that complicated, but the boat is actually really high up off of the platform. So when you're getting people and you say, well, you got to climb over this side of the boat and then come back down onto this walkway that I'm standing on, they're 50 feet up, which is pretty scary for most people just to be 50 feet up. And then they have to step over this boat where they're looking at this platform to stand on over there that's only a couple feet away from where they are, but they have to step down like 4 or 5 feet on top of that. It's really easy to climb over from the platform onto the lift hill and then go up and around the boat. That's no problem. But even myself, when I would climb from the boat back down, for some reason when I was doing that, mainly just to do something in the boat before I started the ride up in the morning time, you would like, ugh, well, don't slip or do anything around here because, man, this looks dangerous. But yeah, that one's kind of a hairy one because it's just like, ooh, it does seem dangerous. There is plenty of room for air. I mean, it's wider than you think it is, but the mentality of it, it's probably one of the worst evacuations because of how that's positioned with that catwalk off to the side and just the sheer amount of height you have to step down just to get to the catwalk itself before you can just go back down the gentle grade back to the station. If boats stop in the run out, which is the big pond pool area out there, if boats stop out there and the pumps shut down and we can't get the pumps running again, we simply just go out there and just grab the boat and push it back around to the station and then get the people off there. That one's not so much chains and things like that. That one's more so much just grab some people, push it around. When the people come in, it's like, hurry, hurry, hurry. Grab the boat, pull it in, and try to shove it up over the drive station tires just to get as many people up into the station as possible. And then everyone finds their way off the boat really quick. That's typically not a problem for people getting off of that one. Let's see. Rapids rides, while we're on water rides. Rapids rides, they're pretty easy because pumps shut down. Everything shuts off because you have to shut the water off. So all the pumps shut down, everything goes down. And then you have a handful of boats on the lift hill, a handful of boats in the station, and then some in the run out down there in the pool again. Those case you bring them onto the catwalk or next to the catwalk as close as you can. And then it typically takes 2 mechanics, one holding the side of the boat, just on the side of it like that, and then the other person with like a rope grabbing the other side just to pin it left to right so it can't rotate. And then once you get it pinned left and right where it can't rotate, you just ask the people to get off, and operations is typically there. That's an easy one. They just, come on, get off. We walk around. We go out there. So let's see. We covered some oddball rides. We covered how to open up some restraints in power failures or SEPs, evacuations. If we have to evacuate people under power failures, it's the same exact process as all, because you have to shut everything off to make sure that if the power comes back on, nothing starts back up and tries to move while you're doing this. So killing the power to everything is always the number 1 thing. I think that's about it, though. I think that's most of the scenarios that we have, decisions on how to make decisions on what makes it time to SEP a ride. Mainly, again, like I said, you're up against time. Time is the thing dwindling away. We want to get people off rides quickly. When SEPs get botched, or when evacuations get botched, they show up on the news for sure. We had, remember, it was in Southern California, the Windseeker down at, I think it was Knott's Berry Farm. It got hung up in the air. It's a big swing style ride where the swings are up there, and it was like, I don't know, it was like 200 feet up in the air, and it broke down, and they couldn't get it down. And they had no lifts to get up to it. So although it was a different manufacturer, different everything else than the swing ride, we had a Starflyer, which it would go up and 150 feet in the air with swings and everything like that. Although it was a completely different ride, different breakdown, different scenario, everything, the state was right at our door the next day, and they were like, you guys are not going to operate your ride until you demonstrate that you have man lifts to get up to the bottom of those swings, and that you can do all this other stuff. So we practiced evacuation on that one so many times, for the state wanted to see it to make sure that we knew how to do it. That ride had lots of different things. It had all sorts of modes you can switch the ride into to bring the star, which is what all the seats were mounted to bring the star back down to the bottom. It even had this end of days device that they gave to us that thankfully we never had to use, or at least the time I was there we never had to use it. It was a large hydraulic ram with a cable pinch and a lifting eyelet on the other side, and in the control room and the winch room at the bottom, you would basically hook this guy up to the winch package and then take the cable pinch and grab the lifting cables, and you grab them like that and then energize it, and it would collapse the cylinder and basically pull the cables down. And when it did that, the star would start to come down as well. And then you have to stop it, push it back up, grab the cables again, pull it down, and then the star would come down. I never used that, but I'd imagine that process would probably take about an hour to do, but that was something catastrophically failed. So thankfully I never had to use that thing, because when it grabbed the cables to do that, you pinched the cables and they had to be replaced. So that was definitely one of those things. If you broke something bad enough to have to use that thing, not only, was your ride going to be down for a long time because you've probably broken some large piece of the ride that's not normally meant to be broken, but now you have to replace the cable that you grabbed a hold of. But on those rides, you typically don't replace one cable, you replace all of them at the same time. So you're probably looking at weeks of downtime if you ever had to use that thing. But it was nice to know the manufacturer had a contingency plan for that in there, because the people down at that one ride in Southern California, they were stuck on there for a couple of hours before they were finally able to get off the ride. And that's one thing that I think every park tries to avoid completely, which is we need to get people off of this stuff before it takes a very long time like that. Sometimes rides do fail in such a way where it was something that the park couldn't plan for or didn't plan for, and people were stuck for a long time, and it happens. It really sucks when it does happen, but it does happen. So parks just try to plan for that and say, okay, well, we have all these contingency plans in place when something similar happens to that. I mean, you can't plan for everything. I mean, what happens if you break a Roth bearing on a wheel carrier assembly and then the thing cocks and tries to roll out from underneath the train, but it can't? It's steel on steel, but it did all this right as it was crowning the lift hill. and then you were dragging steel on the track as it started to go down, and then it completely bound everything and locked up. And it's like, well, where are you going with this? It's like, you could theoretically have a train valley on the drop. Or it would start to go down and just go and stop there. And then you would have your fire and rescue and everyone else looking at how high the ride is, depending on what the ride is, just going, what are we going to do? Because if something messed up that bad to stop something like going down a hill like that, it can't continue. And at that point, I would say it's probably safe to say it probably couldn't go backwards either. So wherever it stopped, you're going to have to figure out how to get people off right there. And those are nightmare scenarios that you never want to engage at all. But that is where your fire and rescue people, the specialty teams have to come in, and probably they call in specialty teams as well to help out. But you would literally have to go climb. Let's say something stopped on a drop that was 250 feet up in the air, like Millennium Force, there's something like that. It crowned and then something catastrophically failed, and it literally stopped on the downside of the drop. Well, man, you would literally have to go up there and remote access, rope access the train, secure it, and then go down one at a time with mechanics now, and dismantle the restraints one person at a time. That way you only open one person's restraint, just enough to put a climbing harness around them, and then that person now has to climb over that train and probably climb back up to the top of the ride before they can go back down the other side. Oh man, I mean, the media fiasco something like that would make, it would be, that would be just ridiculous. I'd hope I never ever see anything like that. But man, but something would definitely have gone really wrong, and that's probably that might spark something like, well, that park needs to replace trains or something like that. Some weird thing going on. I've talked about a lot of stuff. I spun off on a lot of tangents. Sorry about that, although I know people love it when I spin off on tangents because they get the really fun stories out of there. Yeah, that is fun stuff. I think that's about it for this video. I'm going to pack it in for the day, call the evacuation. Anyways, I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Hope you have a good day, safe day, wherever you are. And remember, if you don't know it by now, stay off the air gates. Bye.